Okay, go back up to the what is it? I guess. What was the? I think there was a. Yeah, start from this slide.
Okay, thank you. Are we ready to go, Kathleen? Yep. So, County Farms Estate. So I'm talking today about what Devon County Farms Estate is. So what is it? We are a county-owned asset consisting of just over 9,500 acres, primarily comprising of 65 fully equipped residential dairy and mixed livestock holdings. Our structure is very much in keeping with the ethos of the farming ladder, with 40 starter farms offered to new entrants, with the ability to move on to one of the 25 progression farms thereafter before moving beyond the estate into the private sector. Next slide, please. So why does it exist? Well, most local authorities purchased large amounts of land between 1900 and 1940 to feed the country between and after the wars and provide returning servicemen with careers. But more recently, it's to bring new people into the farming industry. Clearly, estates have evolved over many years, but largely still considered a very important asset to Devon to support rural communities. The present legislative context for county farms is Part 3 of the Agricultural Act 1970, which states that county council shall make it their general aim to offer opportunities for persons to be farmers on their own account. Note it is not a statutory function. So why are we discussing it today? Well, as many people, many commentators and observers will note in the press that many council farm estates have already been sold and others are at risk of being sold. Thankfully, I'd note that Devon's not one of those at the moment. This risk, along with the importance of county farms, was recognised by central government in the agricultural bill and policy statement. But most council farms are in desperate need of further financial investment. The financial investment that we face as council farm is exactly the same as the wider industry, and particularly things like MVZ legislation, SAFO compliance, clean air strategy compliance is hitting the farming or the livestock sectors quite hard in terms of capital needs. Next slide, please. This was all recognised by central government and most notably in the agricultural bill and policy statement. I'll paraphrase this, but you'll note there it says the government will consider how to help local authorities who want to invest in their council farms so that they offer real opportunities for farmers to start a foundation business. Next slide, please. This was then translated further into the Agriculture Act 2020, where the DEFRA Secretary, the Right Honourable George Eustice, MP, said, and again I'll paraphrase, to create new opportunities and support for new entrants coming into the industry. Next slide, please. That then led on to a clearer statement in the Agricultural Transition Plan, which some may argue is perhaps a new dawn for the County Farms Estate Service or council farms. And the statement there is quite telling. DEFRA will provide funding to create lasting opportunities for new entrants to access land, infrastructure and support to establish successful and innovative businesses, working with council farms and indeed other landowners. Next slide, please. So what about Devon County Farms Estate? Well, back in 2010, our politicians and officers were keen to establish a long-standing, robust estate management strategy and plan that would take the estate forward in a proactive and informed way. We adopted a plan which we think should be robust for perhaps the next 25 years or the next 15 years now as it is. But that strategy is constantly under proactive review and development. The key findings of that review was that the estate should be retained to provide opportunities for new agricultural or land-based entrepreneurs. It was recognised that the estate is an asset for the people of Devon. It was recognised that investment was required to ensure that the estate was made fit for purpose for the long term. But it was also recognised that the estate is needed and has to work harder to offer wider corporate aims and objectives, notably education, environmental gain, environmental positive benefits, and social inclusive ventures. Next slide, please. So in terms of our main function, that is to provide new opportunities. Since that strategy was adopted in 2010, we have let 39 new entrant opportunities on the estate. We've also let 10 progression opportunities, i.e. the opportunities for existing tenants on starter farms to progress to larger farms within the estate. And perhaps most pleasingly, since 2010, we've had 26 tenants progress beyond our estate into the private sector in some shape or form. Next slide, please. As an example of one of the tenants moving onto the estate just prior to 2010, but transitioning through it, is the Godwin family. Richard Godwin was a farm manager in Oxfordshire, and in 2009 he applied for and won the tenancy of Merrifield Farm, Holsworthy. It was only a 73-acre farm, but it enabled him to consolidate and grow and establish a business. And within a few years, it was clear that Richard was looking to progress. Richard placed an advert in the local press, and surprise, surprise, he had quite a bit of interest from existing landowners keen to consider and discuss talking about a tenancy for him. Through that exercise, he won the tenancy of a 300-acre farm, which he secured in the private sector in 2015. Richard has since gone on to actually acquire his own farm in Scotland. So in 2020, he bought a 70-acre farm in Scotland. So a classic example of how the estate service can work for those who want to make it work. And Richard's secret is perhaps no different to most entrepreneurial young people we see these days. His ability to deliver all that was driven by hard work, determination, and perhaps notably, a willingness to move geographically. Next slide, please. I talked about the new strategy earlier, and it's perhaps beneficial to note that the flexibility of the new strategy adopted in 2010 has assisted tenants to continue to expand and develop businesses with security of tenure. So we've extended, with agreement with the tenants, 17 starter farm tenancies and 9 progression tenancies, all enabling tenants to further invest, develop and expand their businesses. Next slide, please. So where do our prospective tenants come from? We're pleased to say that our tenants come from a UK-wide remit or geographical area. So we're attracting tenants from Scotland, Wales, Northern England, Eastern England, and obviously down in the southwest as well. So why do they come to us? Well, we think it's because we have a robust and proven management strategy and policy. We have the ability to offer viable farming opportunities. We offer reasonable security of tenure. But most importantly, we offer the ability to build strong foundations on a residential equipped holding with the ability to build strong financial footings and good working relationship with lenders. Next, please. In terms of the level of demand, it may not seem a significant number, but we currently have about 200 people on our main list, seriously interested in farms. But more recently, perhaps in the last 4 or 5 years, we've started using social media to advertise our opportunities. And the last round of advertising, we saw our social media adverts attract over 30,000 people reached. And of those 30,000 people reached, over 5,000 people viewed our letting particulars. Clearly not 5,000 people are going to be applying for farms there, but as an example, the farm we advertised last September, we had 36 applicants, serious applicants who viewed the farm. We had 21 applicants apply, 6 applicants shortlisted for interview, but only at the end of the day, we can only offer the farm to 1 applicant. It was quite clear from that advertising campaign that had we had more farms available, we could have let many more farms to very competent people. Next slide, please. The farm I was talking about that we advertised to let in September 2020 was Lower Parle Hayes Farm, Woodbury. It was only a 108-acre residential equipped holding, with a successful applicant there who won the tenancy in open market competition. Is milking sheep and dairy shorthorn cows. He has a high value product which he sells direct to processors such as Sharpham Estate and Sycamore Cheese and Neil's Yard. He has a relatively low cost of production. He's a former Farmers Weekly Sheep Farm of the Year finalist. And we acknowledge he had previously been farming, but he'd been farming on an insecure footing, on short-term rented land agreements with some buildings, but absolutely no security of tenure. He was farming on a knife edge, and it was proving difficult for him to invest in the property, invest in the business, and secure lending to do so. The opportunity of taking a council farm has enabled him to pull all of his business strings together, consolidate it onto one base, and provide confidence in his lenders and customers that he is there for the long term. Next slide, please. So what are the backgrounds of typical new entrants? We see that most new entrants have either started farming part-time in their own right on bits of grasskeep, etc., and begged, borrowed, and I won't say stolen, but begged and borrowed buildings for overwintering stock. They're farming in a highly inefficient manner. It's very expensive to farm in that way, but it is enabling them to develop some experience and to demonstrate they have a proven ability. Some prospective tenants are farm managers or herd managers. Some prospective tenants come from share farming or contract farming agreements, typically wanted to take their farming career to the next level and actually farming in an independent way, and perhaps not being beholden in the same way to the share farming partner or contract farming partner. Yes, we do let some farms to existing sons and daughters of existing tenants, existing farmers, and typically we may see scenarios where there might be 3 or 4 siblings all interested in farming, but the family farm can only accommodate 1 or perhaps 2 of them, and somebody has to step away from that farm to start farming in their own right. So we see tenants coming from that direction as well. But it is quite noticeable that we are continuing to see an increasing number of first-generation farmers. And by that I mean people who haven't come from a direct farming background, but there is something in their genetics or behaviours that says they really want to go farming, and they work hard to find a way into farming, whether that be working through other people, going to agricultural college, and ultimately looking to us to provide them a farming opportunity. Next slide, please. So why is that all important? It is imperative that prospective tenants are able to demonstrate some degree of experience. They need to be able to demonstrate they have the practical farming skills and the business and financial management skills to run their own business. And that is driven ideally by a combination of formal education and on-farm practical experience. Without that experience, given that the marketplace for tenancies is so competitive and we're only able to award a tenancy to the best candidate that we see in front of us, without that experience, it's unlikely they'll be able to secure a tenancy. Notwithstanding that principal point, there is clearly, obviously, the risk of animal health and welfare issues arising if they don't have any experience of looking after livestock. And there's the risk that financial and other mistakes can be made, which ultimately prove to be expensive and can be catastrophic to some businesses. And without experience, it is often very difficult to persuade lenders that they should be awarded loans or grants or overdrafts. Next slide, please. So what are we doing about ensuring prospective candidates, prospective tenants and existing tenants have the right skill sets? So for a number of years now, we have been supporting Dutchy College with their Level 4 apprenticeship programme with a mock farm viewing exercise where we invite the students to a farm and then they submit a mock application, and tenancy application and business plan, and we interview them. We've also been doing that same exercise with the Devon Federation of Young Farmers Clubs, and we've probably been doing that with the YFC for nearly 20 years now. And in 2019, with support from the Prince's Countryside Fund, we established our own tenants training academy to upskill our existing tenants to ensure that they are best placed to compete for tenancies being offered in the private sector with the larger institutional landlords. Next slide, please. I'll just canter through, conscious of time, a couple of case studies just to give you a flavour of the kind of entrepreneurial spirit that we have on the estate. So next slide, please. So at Cotley Farm, Ottery St Mary, we have Luke and Emily Knight, who are new entrants to us in 2018. They quickly established Knight's Farm, which consists of a very busy farm shop, but more importantly, an award-winning care farm facility where they embrace the concept of social prescribing, working with the local GP practice and local schools, and they are AQA accredited. They accommodate people with a range of learning disabilities, a range of complex needs, mental health issues and the like, and it is proving to be an incredibly useful diversification on the farm, not just for their own financial gain, but for the wider community. Next slide, please. Lower end of the farm, Kenspear, 181 acres, let to new entrants Liz and Marcus Warner in 2012. Now, Liz and Marcus has developed a business. They produce over 25% of the quail eggs nationally, well over 25% of the duck eggs nationally, and again, they've developed an award-winning enterprise there. Next slide, please. Higher Fingal Farm, Drew Stainton, 154-acre organic farm, home to Drake's Farm. So it's a beef and sheep organic unit, but it also accommodates now a farm shop, a cafe, an education centre where the little farmers are occupied. And with our consent, they've sublet a building to Ground Up Cookery, which is a well-renowned local cookery school. Next slide, please. Westcott Farm, Bolescombe, is a typical dairy farm on the estate at 209 acres. In about 2012, Gordon and Hazel were going to lose their milk supply contract as the processor was closing the factory doors. At that time, very few milk buyers were looking for new suppliers. But rather than throwing the towel, Gordon got off his backside and went around the country looking for direct opportunities to sell his milk, and secured some contracts in the east of England. And to achieve his supply procurement, he actually went out and bought his own milk tanker. He not only provided a lifeline for his own business, but he also managed to provide a lifeline for 6 other producers who were going to lose their milk contracts at the same time. And as a consequence of his endeavours, in 2016, he was awarded Devon Farmer of the Year. Next slide, please. Again, another dairy farm, but again, dairy farm where the tenants diversified. Dave Bragg recognised an opportunity for green waste composting, and he secured contracts with Plymouth City Council, Southampton West Devon District Council, and he's licensed to accommodate 10,000 tonnes of green waste per annum, which has significantly reduced the level of landfill in Devon, which in turn reduced the amount of CO2 emissions coming from that landfill. Next slide, please. So that's just giving you a bit of a flavour for the entrepreneurial spirit that exists on our estate, and it is the entrepreneurial spirit we look for in our tenants. So what is the key factors that enables business to innovate? Well, to use, I suppose, a quote from Minette Batters, who I think famously said, you have to be in the black to be green. It is our view that you have to be in the black to diversify. So enables a business to diversify, you must first have a strong commercial farm business, which is financially profitable and viable. It gives the security for the lenders to willingly give out greater loans, but it also enables them to demonstrate they have a business and financial planning experience, confidence and ability. But also in terms of diversification, very often tenants have a need to diversify if they're going to be able to accelerate their expansion plans. Next slide, please. In addition to our core farm enterprise, in recent years, we've broadened our role, and we are now utilising surplus farm buildings to offer direct lets or sublets through tenants to a wider range of services. So we have a brewery. We have an independent farm shop. I already mentioned the cookery school. We've got a carpentry workshop, and we have a glass art studio as well on the estate. Next slide, please. Again, I'll just quickly canter through some wider aims and objectives. So very much education, renewable, added value goods and services, employment, etc. Next slide, please. Core to our education offering is the FarmWise event, which has been running for over 7 years. Unfortunately, COVID has stopped in 2020 and 2021. But thus far, we've reached over 10,000 7 to 11-year-olds and educated them all about local food and farming. Next slide, please. We use the, sorry, Catherine, it's no worries. We use the estate to prudently to look at biodiversity offsetting for county council schemes, such as the highway scheme of the A382. Next slide, please. The estate can be used where we've got marginal ground for carbon sequestration and biodiversity enhancement. Next slide, please. We use the estate for creating permissive access and the footpath at Halberton, which we established a few years ago with trackers on there. It was used over 10,000 times in the first year. Next slide, please. We're exploring working in partnership with some with Benneman Limited, Agri Epicentre, Plymouth University, Rothamsted Research Centre and Duchy College, looking at retrofit covers to existing slurry stores for methane harvesting. Next slide, please. We're working in partnership with organisations such as UNESCO North Devon Biosphere Reserve, where they're being let 12 acres of woodland to demonstrate best practice, charcoal production, etc. Next slide, please. So the future, well, what does it look like for us? Well, we think more of the same, please. The service works well. There's huge demand for the service. You know, as I said earlier, we often interview 6 highly capable candidates for a farm, and the interview panel would like to be able to offer any one of those 6 a farm, but at the end of the day, we generally only have 1 farm to let. There's always scope to make greater economic, social, environmental use of the asset. We're exploring, well, very early days of exploring whether or not we should engage in offering bare land new entrant opportunities, whether we should diversify and offer horticultural opportunities. Indeed, whether we need to consider vertical farming opportunities in or near urban areas. We're exploring what the estate can do in terms of payments for ecosystem services or payments for other public goods. And we're also exploring how we can use surplus, redundant or traditional buildings to offer more rural business opportunities. So I think that's a quick canter through, Henry, the presentation. I hope it's given people a flavour of what we do as an estate, what the estate can offer, what the County Farms estate nationally could offer, and I'll happily invite questions.
Thank you very much. If Catherine, you could unshare, that would be great. Brilliant. I might just ask Dan, when we talked some time ago, you also talked about innovating in terms of processing pasture land, grass and so forth into plant proteins. Is that, you didn't mention that, is that? Yeah, we've got another tenant working with a eminent university looking at types of crop that are best suited to our climate for producing homegrown proteins as opposed to imported proteins. Well, that sounds very cutting edge. It's early days. We've also you know, it's quite remarkable when you scratch the surface how many tenants are engaged with stakeholders. You know, you know, there's a trial going on with Reading University on terms of different grasses. There's a trial going on with a milk processor in terms of additives to the cow's diet to reduce methane emissions. So yeah, there's a wide range of activity going on. What we are, you know, we're a relatively small estate. We're only 9,500 acres. In terms of the national picture, you know, we're minuscule, but there's a lot of activity going on, which hopefully will inform best practices in the future. Brilliant. Thanks. David.
Thank you, Henry, and thank you, Dan. I think it's fair to say that was a brilliant presentation and really sort of showcase what you offer to new entrants and sort of next generation farmers. I probably should say I'm a dairy and beef farmer in Gloucestershire and also chair the NFU Next Generation Forum. which, as I expect you know, Liz Warner, who you mentioned in your presentation, sits on as well. So I know, starting to know Liz a little bit better now. Obviously, we haven't been able to meet because of the way things are, but yeah, it has been a real asset to us. And well, just a couple of points in your presentation I'm just interested just to hear a little bit more about. You mentioned about establishing a relationship to lenders. Obviously, with new entrants, we all appreciate that that's a huge challenge. Competitive rates of finance. I know Liz would definitely say that. Do you feel that by sort of maybe mentoring or sort of helping your new entrants, do you get a better response from the bank, or to try and offer more competitive rates? I know Liz would say that, you know, when they first started out, they had a really tough time getting competitive rates of finance. And as I've got the floor, you know, you also mentioned first generation farmers. I think Liz would probably fit into that category as well. I mean, what percentage would you say of, you know, when you sort of grant a tenancy, I mean, how many would be first generation farmers, just roughly, just out of interest? Obviously, it's fantastic to have new innovation and thoughts coming into the industry. But like I said, it would just, if you don't mind, and I have an idea, it'd be great to sort of hear your thoughts on those two things. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. I'll deal with the first one, the finance one first. Yeah, when we went through our 2010 review, we actually reached out to the primary lending banks that were supporting agriculture at the time, and we asked them what we could do more. And one of the things we did is slightly increase the length of tenancy that tenants had, so that they had a greater term to pay back initial borrowings, and by that. It eased the pressure on obviously the monthly repayments that tenants were facing, but also did have a slight difference in the rate of lending that they were able to secure. So there was an immediate effect of our change policy in 2010. We also reached out in terms of, you know, how we could help tenants secure funding for investments on the farm. And one of the things we did with the banks is we put in a robust mechanism whereby we'd have a robust landlord's consent letter for the tenants for their investment, which they were going to leave from the farm end of tenancy, which clearly set out what compensation tenants will get at end of tenancy or partway through the tenancy should they leave early. And again, with that letter of consent, that gave the banks the confidence to say there's the county council guaranteeing this level of compensation at end of tenancy. And that gave the confidence in the banks to lend the tenants more money. So we've done what we can. We haven't got preferential rates for tenants. I think that would be wonderful if we could secure that, but I think that's highly unlikely for us to be able to secure. In terms of the new entrants who are genuine first-time farmers, I haven't mapped it precisely, but my gut feeling would be we're probably around 25% of our new tenants coming as who are bona fide first-generation tenants, but that number is starting to increase.
And if I may just come back, I mean, I had a couple of points. Sorry. Sorry, you have to come back to me, Henry. Sorry, I just lost. Okay. But yeah, appreciate that, Dan. Thank you.
Well, while you're waiting, Dan, I had a question. It's interesting your model where, I mean, from your description of the people who are applying, they were really top rate, you know, hugely competitive. They're people who are hugely skilled, have most of the you know, skills needed to be a successful farmer. How do you differentiate what you're offering to a private sector landlord, presumably such a person would be able to, or should be able to get a tenancy with them just as easily? What's your USP, if you like?
I think it's scale, to be honest, Henry. We see that the vast majority of farms let in the private sector, whether that be institutional landlords or private landlords, tend to be substantially larger than our holdings. We're already seeing for us, you know, that we're coming up a bit of a crunch point in terms of the size and scale of our dairy farms. You know, dairy is notably expensive to get into. Most young people or new entrants into farming struggles is to generate the capital required to take on a dairy farm of 100 and 150 acres. You know, we're talking hundreds of thousands of pounds to properly equip that. If they're looking at farms, that are in the private sector, that may be 200, 300, 400 acres in size, most new entrants would not be able to generate the capital required to take that on. So what we're looking at, and I touched on earlier, and it's touched in the Ag Act as well, is about the farming ladder. We see ourselves as providing that viable yet affordable means of entry for those people to be able to come and consolidate what they're doing on a part-time basis, build a viable business, put some capital behind them, establish a relationship with the lending institutions, and then hopefully be able to go on to the next step, which would then be the private sector landlords.
Others who, Sarah.
Yeah, hi, that was a great presentation. I work with Henry in DEFRA on the new entrance scheme. Brilliant presentation, really inspiring to see what all your farms are achieving. Last week we had a presentation from Clinton Devon Estates, which was great, and they gave us a case study on one of their farms, but they were clear that it was a part-time holding, and I wondered how many of your farms fell into that category, i.e. where it actually requires, maybe that one of the the spouse or whatever to go out to work to have an off-farm income in order to make them viable, or whether yours wash their faces, so to speak.
Yeah, it's a really good question. It's a question that's almost impossible to answer. The example I think that John Varley gave last week happened to be one of our tenants who took that farm, Sam and Nell, and I think they secured the first farm that Clinton Devon Estates had advertised for 25 years, I think. So again, testament to the calibre of tenants we have on our estate to win that in competition. Vast majority of our estates tenants will have an alternative income stream. There's no doubt about it. Whether that be farming off farm themselves, we've got people who farm effectively the holding, but they might be foot trimmers. They might be sales reps, they might be agronomists, they do things like that. Other tenants choose to supplement their income by diversification on farm, whether that be, as I say, higher artisan, where they've got the green waste composting, or higher fingal, where they've got the cookery school and the farm shop and the butchery and the cafe, etc. But it's not necessarily an essential financial need that they carrying out these additional activities, whether that be on or off farm. It tends to be the drive and ambition of the people themselves who want to earn more money than they can just by simply farming. They recognise that if they're going to excel in this industry, they need to use all the skills and resources they have available to them, and if that means they're a foot trimmer and they can accommodate foot trimming while they're farming as well, they're clearly going to be able to earn more money more quickly. They're going to be able to equip the farm better and more quickly. They're going to be able to put money behind them for that next step in the farming ladder, because if they're doubling up, tripling up the size of their farm, and they've got to buy another 100 cows to take on a bigger dairy farm, that's got to be financed somewhere, and the less dependent they can be on the financial institutions for that funding, then the better that's going to look to the next landlord.
I don't have an answer to that. Is there something else
Siri's talking to me. She didn't agree with that.
That makes a lot of sense, and I wonder really whether that's kind of the future of farming, where you have to be thinking about having other sources of income and diversification, and that's really what will make farming sustainable in the future. But maybe that's others might find that a controversial view, but from what you're saying, those that are most likely to succeed do think in that way around doing other things that can help supplement the farm business. And there are various motivations we can see about why you would want to be a farmer, and it's not just financial, obviously.
Dan, I might just ask another question, as other people please do come forward, but I'm interested in your references to the farming ladder, because I was having a conversation with Jeremy Moody of CAAV recently, and he was questioning whether the farm ladder in the sort of post, well, certainly he was questioning in the past whether it was reality, but more so in the future, in that he was suggesting that, I mean, that was based on an idea of commodity-based farming, where basically you try to have as big a land as possible to spread the overheads of a single farmer, whereas the future was more likely to be about value added, which is a sort of building, I suppose, on what Sarah's saying, so that actually size of your farm was much less important, and actually the ladder was probably more in terms of value added activities and diverse, all those sort of things, than getting more land.
Yeah, I mean, Jerry is not necessarily wrong in terms of how things may have been perceived historically, in terms of farming was farming, and farming, expanded through economies of scale, more land, more livestock, more crops, etc. Farming has changed, and we've all got to recognise that. And we are seeing, and the conversation we're having with private landlords, when you see adverts go out from private landlords or institutional estates, they're looking for just that. They're looking for people who can add value. They're looking to people that can bring additional benefits to their estate, whether that be through environmental gains, whether that be through social gains, whether that be for engagement in the local community, providing a local farm shop locally. We're seeing more and more estates looking for that as part of their portfolio. And I think what we're doing is, showcasing that our tenants can do that. You take Luke and Emily Knight at Cotley, who are doing this care farming there. What landlord would not want to see that kind of activity on their estate? So I think we are, through our policies and procedures, perhaps subversively or inadvertently, equipping tenants that we have on their estate to be highly competitive when they're looking to progress beyond their estate, because they have that broad range of experience and skill sets.
And do you think there'll be those sort of people? Will they want more land? I mean, you have a sort of cut-off point, don't you, where people have to move on, don't they? So is that right? So at that point, they have to look for something else after 10, is it 10 years or what?
Yeah, so in 2010, we set a policy because, we recognise that if we're going to maintain throughput, we can't be offering careers for life or people's work in life. And people have to understand that, we're part of the farming ladder. We're not the whole farming ladder. And I think tenants have embraced that and they understand it. And I say we've got tenants progressing. We had a tenant a couple of years ago progress after being on a starter dairy farm for 3 years, and he progressed to a Duchy of Cornwall farm after being with us for only 3 years. So as soon as they're ready to make that leap into the private sector, they're doing so, and that's obviously unlocking more and more opportunities for greater turnover. But we do have a limit. We do say, a starter tenant can have initial term of 7 years on the starter farm tenancy. That can be extended up to 14 years on a starter farm tenancy, but there's a maximum term of 14 years, because if they haven't moved from a 100-acre or so farm in that time frame, then are they likely to? They can move on to a progression farm, which is let for initial term of 15 years, and then tenants can have a maximum term of 25 years on the estate. Our tenants understand that, and thus far, we're seeing that is proving to be ample time for tenants to build strong business and compete well for tenancies that are offered in the private sector. Or indeed, we have tenants who are buying their own farms or buying their own land. I mean, I just mentioned the Godwins, who, people were prepared to go to Scotland to go and buy their own farm.
There was just a chat saying, is this sort of policy widespread across county farms or not? I think not, isn't it? You are.
No, each authority will have their own strategy and own policy. Some estates will let tenancies for longer. Some estates will let tenancies for shorter term.
Okay, Emma.
Thanks for that, Dan. Interesting. I just wondered, you said that you're advertising your farm opportunities now on social media. Have you found that that's reaching, obviously it's reaching a bigger audience, but has it resulted in more diverse people coming forward and applying for the farms?
Yes, it has attracted a more diverse range of people coming to look at the farms, and some are ready and able to apply for farms. Some of them, when they come and have a conversation and look at what they're looking to take on, realise that they need to go away and develop the skills necessary to take on a business of that magnitude.
And where do they go? Yeah, sorry, go on.
No. No, I was just going to say that's still fulfilling a valuable role then.
Yeah, but do they? So where do these? If someone comes in that situation, do you advise them? Do you give them any particular advice as to where they can build their skills?
We try and give robust and sound feedback. So if someone has come, but they've got, they appear to have all the enthusiasm, drive and ambition, but they're perhaps lacking in practical experience, when you talk to them about, well, have you actually, calved a cow or lambed a ewe? And they say, well, no, then it suggests that they might want to go and, get some work experience and go and work for someone and go do a lambing season, and or go to one of the agricultural colleges and get that experience. Others, think that they can turn from being, I don't know, a dentist to a farmer overnight, but we try to direct them and sort of say, it's not something you can just turn your hat to, instantaneously. It is a highly skilled job, and we can't afford for people unskilled to come to the estate and make big mistakes that have animal welfare consequences.
Right, David.
I think that just really interesting, Dan, what you said about like I said, not giving people their whole career. And I think across it, maybe I don't know whether it's not for me to say whether it's DEFRA's job to sort of look at other parts of the country to see where there aren't very many new entrants being given opportunities, and whether they could sort of aid the local authority there to sort of consider a policy like yours, which seems fairly progressive to me in terms of, I don't know how many other parts of the country that are offering the number of new entrants farms like you are. To me, it just seems like a much better way of getting people, more set up and established and going. Private landlords, I think, more on sort of previous weeks' webinars have, always been sort of said that it maybe, so obviously some, but some seem more nervous about new entrants and would say it's more of a high risk, than possibly your approach, which seems very forward thinking, I would say. Probably more of a comment really than a question, but yeah, no, like I said, I just don't know whether you think that's worth sort of pursuing out in other parts of the country, because I'm sure it must be a mixed picture with how many new entrants are being given opportunities in other parts of the country that have significant sort of county council holdings.
Yeah, I mean, if the CAB land survey is to be the acid test for new entrants, then I think you're probably right, David. There are pockets of the country that have estates who perhaps don't have the same level of turnover of tenants that perhaps we do in the southwest. But you're absolutely also right, David. Taking on a new entrant opportunity, it is a risk. To some degree, they are untried and tested, but at the end of the day, that is our role. We have a robust method of determining capability, competency, financial acumen, and generally we get it right. We don't always get it right. We do have people who struggle, but again, we try and nurture and support those people who are struggling from conception, and the council is willing as well to invest funding. So we've had a few tenants who have struggled in the past, and the council's put money to them engage in their own independent consultancy to try and get them back on the straight and narrow. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I was going to say, do you ever have any business failures completely, or is it generally by the time they've done the sort of interview process that they've already sort of made sure that doesn't sort of happen?
I'd be lying if I said we don't have business failures. It is life. The number of tenants that we have and the number of turnover we have, and sometimes we take more risk with someone who appears to have all the right credentials, but for whatever reason, things go wrong for people at times, don't they? they might, you take this spring, you could have been awarded a tenancy, you've gone to market and you've bought breeding stock at ridiculous money this spring, and next spring that the value of that breeding stock might be half. You just don't know, and those kind of things happen.
Yeah, no, sure.
Dan, it's interesting. I was having a conversation this morning with Johnny Alfred. I'm trying to remember what his surname, Alfred, and John McMillan. Yeah, about this issue of people stuck in council farms and whether it's potential to provide some sort of acceleration training to get them into a place where they're better able to pitch for tenancies outside council farms, and presumably you were talking about preparing people at the end of the tenancy for helping them to pitch for private sector tenancies. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, part of our tenants training academy was part of that was upskilling those tenants, and we did invite a private sector landlord to come and speak to our training academy to sort of say, well, here and now, what are they looking for in the next generation of new tenants, so that they could be alert to the kind of things that we're looking for. So I totally agree with John and Johnny that ongoing training for existing tenants, upskilling of existing tenants, refreshing of interview skills, refreshing of business planning preparation skills would be incredibly valuable.
Brilliant. Kate, you put a question in the chat. Maybe you could, so it's recorded, maybe you could ask your question.
Thanks very much, Dan. That was great and really inspirational to hear what you're doing in Devon. I'm in Cumbria and Yorkshire Dales, and I wondered, and I work for the Farmer Network, and we do some help for young people getting into farming and business support. And I just wondered how you mentioned about doing the family who was struggling, and you helped them have some private business advice to help them get out of their difficulties. And I just wondered whether there's like an ongoing support. Do you do regular reviews with them, or is that more intensive than a commercial landlord would do, where they might not review things until it's like the rent review time?
Yeah, it's difficult to comment on what we do in comparison with private institutional landlords, and because I don't know what monitoring they really do on a day-to-day basis. Certainly for our new entrants, I'm always there, and I probably see the new entrant every couple of months in their first year, just to make sure we're communicating. It's much easier for them to ask me questions while I'm on the farm than it is for them to perhaps pick up the phone and speak to me. But in their first term of 7 years, they will also have 2 formal visits with myself, the chairman and vice chairman of the Farm Estate Committee, where we will, on an open book accountancy basis, have a robust review of the performance. So the first one is after 18 months of taking on the tenancy, and just so that we can see that everything is working both practically. They're building stock numbers, the animals are looking well and healthy, the farm is in good condition, they're producing good quality crops, but also their first set of accounts has shown improvement, i.e. their net worth gains improved. And then when it comes to year 6 of their initial tenancy, we'll do that exercise again to see that in that first 6 years they have increased their net worth on their balance sheet by X £1,000 to show that it is working financially, and they're ready for that next step of the next farm. If after the first 18-month monitoring visit, we have concerns that the business isn't progressing quite well enough, then we'll repeat that maybe in 6 months' time or 12 months' time, that formal visit, that formal audit, that formal process, to ensure that whatever we can do, whether that be providing that capital or that revenue funding for them to go and get some consultancy, we inject that support at the right time.
Thank you. That sounds great, and much more sort of supportive and helpful, but obviously more expensive, presumably. Your team's putting in a lot of time for what are relatively, like you say, relatively small farms, but that's all part of the cooking and development process then.
It is, and you say it's expensive, and yes, on face value, it is labour intensive to undertake this level of support. But overall, it's far, in my view, it's far better to ensure that you pick up early warning signs and support someone going through trouble than find out 3 years down the line that someone's in serious financial difficulty and they're facing insolvency. The farmer's gone backwards in terms of its condition and dilapidations, etc., potential bad debt in rent and other factors. It's far better to pick up those issues early doors.
That's great, thank you.
Well, we're just about coming to the end. There's a question, would it be possible to share the slides, please? We put the recording up with the slides on YouTube, and you'll be circulating the links and so on, so you can see those. Brilliant. Well, thank you very much, Dan. I mean, it really, the variety of enterprises you have is absolutely amazing, and I think you're obviously doing incredible work to develop innovative new stuff. I'm sure lots of people are looking at you and going to be copying you. Maybe private landlords will be getting ideas from you as well. But so it's great to see and learn more about what you do. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone. Catherine, could you quickly say what we've got next week?
Yep, so next week we're going to have Lynn Davis from the Open Food Network and Simon Platten from Tamar Grow Local discussing about food hubs for retail and wholesale in the UK.
So this is about the linkages and the supply chains to actually successful innovative businesses may well need to get to market. Brilliant. Thank you very much all, and have a great day. Thank you, and goodbye.
Thank you, Henry. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.